Buddha times Camus. They both started with suffering and went opposite ways. Act 1. The same mountain. There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. That is the first line of the most famous philosophy book of the 20th century. Albert Camus wrote it in 1942, in the middle of a world war, in a country under occupation, at the age of 29, and he meant it literally. Before we ask any other question about God, about meaning, about how to live, we have to answer that one first, because if life has no meaning, why continue? 2,500 years earlier, on the other side of the world, a man sat under a tree and arrived at essentially the same starting point. Life as normally lived is suffering. Not sometimes, not for the unlucky, for everyone, as a condition, as a diagnosis. Two men, same emergency. And what happened next is one of the most important disagreements in the history of human thought, because they didn't just disagree about the answer. They disagreed about whether an answer is even possible. That's what this video is about. Not which one was right. Something more useful than that. What each one saw that the other didn't, and why the difference might matter to you tonight, wherever you are, whatever you're carrying. Let's start with the man you probably know less about. Albert Camus lost his father before he could walk. Lucien Camus was killed at the Battle of the Marne in 1914. Albert was 11 months old. He grew up in a 2-room apartment in Algiers with his mother, who was partially deaf, who worked as a cleaning woman, who could barely read. There were no books in the house. At 17, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis. In 1930s, Algeria, that was close to a death sentence. It ended his football career, the one thing that had given him joy, and gave him something else instead. An intimate daily awareness that his body could betray him at any moment. He would carry that awareness for the rest of his life, and it would become the engine of everything he wrote. He became a journalist, then a novelist. Then, during the German occupation of France, he became the editor of Combat, the most important resistance newspaper in the country, writing anonymously, knowing that capture meant death. He was 30 years old. In 1957, he won the Nobel Prize in Literature. He was 44, the second youngest laureate in history. 3 years later, on January 4th, 1960, he was riding in a car driven by his publisher. The car hit a tree. Camus died instantly. He was 46. In his coat pocket, they found an unused train ticket. He had planned to take the train instead. Here is what matters about that biography. Camus did not arrive at his philosophy from a library. He arrived at it from a life that kept confirming it. Loss before memory, disease before adulthood, war before middle age, death before old age, and through all of it, not despair, something stranger than despair, a fierce, almost joyful refusal to look away. And on the other side of the world, 25 centuries earlier, a prince who had been shielded from every form of suffering walked out of his palace, saw sickness, old age, and death for the first time, and sat in silence for 6 years until something in him broke open. You may know that story already. What matters here is this. Both men were shattered by the same recognition. Both refused the easy exits, and both built an entire philosophy on what came next. They never met. They never could have met. There is no historical connection between them. Camus never studied Buddhism, never referenced it, never engaged with it. His influences were Greek tragedy, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, the Mediterranean sun. If anything connects them, it runs through Schopenhauer, who did engage with Indian thought. But even that thread is thin, which makes the parallel more interesting, not less. Because when two people who have never spoken arrive at the same starting point from completely different directions, the starting point is probably real. There is a word in Pali, the language of the earliest Buddhist texts, that describes exactly what Camus felt. The word is saṃvega. The scholar monk Thanissaro Bhikkhu defines it as the oppressive sense of shock and dismay that comes with realizing the futility of life as it's normally lived. Not a passing mood, not depression, a clear-eyed recognition that the way most people spend their days, accumulating, striving, distracting, hoping, doesn't lead anywhere that lasts. Buddhism has a name for this, and so did Camus, though he called it something else. He called it the absurd. Now, and this is important enough to pause on, the absurd is not nihilism. Camus spent much of his career making sure people understood that distinction. Nihilism says nothing matters. The absurd says something very different. It says you desperately need things to matter, and the universe says nothing back. The absurd is not a property of life. It's not a property of the universe. It's the collision between the two. Your need, its silence. That gap, that is the absurd. Camus rejected nihilism explicitly and forcefully. In The Rebel, he attacked it directly. 2 weeks before his death, he told an interviewer that existentialism of the Sartrean variety ended up as a theology without God. He wanted no part of that. The absurd was not a conclusion. It was a starting condition. And saṃvega, the Buddhist version, is also a starting condition. It is not where you stay. It is what propels you forward. In the Buddhist framework, saṃvega is supposed to give rise to something else, pasāda, clarity, serene confidence. Not that life isn't what you feared, it is, but that there is a way through. Saṃvega without pasāda, that is absurdism. Saṃvega with pasāda, that is Buddhism. Remember that line. It's the hinge this entire conversation turns on, because what happens next, the part where these two traditions diverge so sharply that you might wonder how they ever started in the same place, comes down to one question. After you see the truth about suffering, is there somewhere to go? Or is the seeing itself all there is? Camus said, there is nowhere to go. And that is not a tragedy. That is where freedom begins. Buddha said, there is somewhere to go. And the path is precise. 2 answers, both given with absolute conviction, both earned through a lifetime, one very short, one very long, of refusing to pretend. Let's hear them out. Act 2. The Doctor and the Rebel. The Buddha's response to suffering has a structure that most people miss, because it doesn't look like philosophy. It looks like medicine. There is a famous passage in the Pali Canon, the Kulamalunkhya Sutta, M.N. 63, where a monk named Malunkyaputta comes to the Buddha with a list of metaphysical questions. Is the universe eternal or not? Is the soul the same as the body or different? Does the Tathagata exist after death? The Buddha doesn't answer any of them. Instead, he tells a story. A man is shot with a poisoned arrow. A surgeon arrives, and the man says, I will not let you remove this arrow until I know who shot it, what caste he belongs to, whether the bow was a longbow or a crossbow, whether the arrow was feathered with hawk or peacock. That man, the Buddha says, would die before he got his answers. The point is not that the questions are bad. The point is that you are bleeding, and the arrow can be removed right now without answering any of those questions first. This is the spirit of the Four Noble Truths. Not a creed, not a theology, a diagnosis. First, there is suffering, dukkha, and it is not an accident, not a punishment, not a flaw in the design. It is the condition, SN 56.11. Second, that suffering has a specific cause, craving tanha, the relentless reaching for what isn't here and the pushing away of what is, SN 56.11. Third, that cause can cease. This is not a hope, it is a clinical claim. Remove the cause, the symptom stops, SN 56.11. Fourth, there is a path, specific, practicable, testable, that leads from cause to cessation, SN 56.11. Notice the architecture. It moves. It goes somewhere. Diagnosis to etiology to prognosis to treatment. The Buddha saw exactly what Camus saw. Life as normally lived is a cycle of wanting and not getting, getting and losing, losing and wanting again. And his response was, I know what causes this, and I know how to stop it. That is the move from saṃvega to pasāda. The shock doesn't diminish. The confidence appears alongside it. Not confidence that life will improve. Confidence that there is a way through. Now, Camus. Camus saw the same wound, and his response was, do not treat it. Not because treatment is impossible, though he suspected it was, but because every treatment he examined turned out to be a form of self-deception. He laid this out methodically in the myth of Sisyphus. You have seen the truth. Life has no inherent meaning. The universe is silent and you will die. Given that, there are exactly 3 things you can do. The first is physical suicide. End it. Camus rejects this immediately, not on moral grounds, but on logical ones. Suicide eliminates one term of the equation. The absurd is the confrontation between you and the universe. Kill yourself, and there is no confrontation. You haven't solved the problem. You've deleted the person who had it. That is not an answer. That is an escape. The second is what Camus calls philosophical suicide. This is the one that matters for us. Philosophical suicide is any system of thought that resolves the tension by providing a framework of meaning, an answer, a transcendence, a path. Kierkegaard's leap of faith, sacrifice reason, embrace God. Jasper's appeal to transcendence, Husserl's hidden essences. Any move that takes the absurd, that raw, uncomfortable confrontation between your need and the world's silence, and resolves it, wraps it up, gives it somewhere to go. Camus' verdict on all of them. They deify what crushes them and find reason to hope in what impoverishes them. They cannot bear the tension, so they escape it. Not through a window, but through a door marked meaning. And that, Camus says, is its own kind of suicide. Not of the body, of the mind's honesty. The third option, the one Camus chooses, is revolt. Live without appeal. No external meaning, no cosmic narrative, no afterlife, no path to transcendence. Just this, full awareness of the absurd, sustained without flinching, for as long as you are alive. And from that awareness, 3 consequences follow. Revolt, a perpetual confrontation with the meaninglessness. Not a one-time recognition, but an ongoing stance. Freedom, because if there is no eternal judge, no karmic accounting, no final tally, then you are free in a way that no believer can be. And passion, because mortality is not a limit on experience, but the very thing that makes experience intense. This is not nihilism. Camus was precise about that. The absurd does not liberate, it binds. Everything is permitted does not mean nothing is forbidden. Revolt has a discipline to it. Revolt has limits. That distinction between rebellion with limits and revolution without them would later cost Camus his closest friendship when he and Sartre split over The Rebel in 1952. But that is a story for another time. What matters here is the shape of the response. Where the Buddha saw the wound and reached for a precise instrument, the Eightfold Path, the training in ethics, concentration, and wisdom. Camus saw the wound and said, "Do not close it. Keep it open. The wound is where the light enters." No. Camus would not have said that. He would have said, "The wound is where the light enters and also where it leaves, and there is no closing it. And the attempt to close it is the deepest form of self-betrayal." And here, right here, is where the images diverge so sharply they almost crack the frame. The Dhammapada records the Buddha's words at the moment of his awakening. After 6 years of seeking, after trying every path available to a seeker in 5th century India, something gave way. And what the Buddha said was this: "House builder, you are seen. You will not build a house again. All your rafters are broken, your ridgepole destroyed. My mind has reached the unconditioned. The end of craving has been attained." DHP 153 to 154. The house builder is tanha, craving. And what craving builds again and again is the house of self, the house of suffering, the structure that keeps the cycle turning. Awakening, in this image, is not moving into a better house. It is watching the builder exposed, the mechanism revealed, the construction halted, not by force, by seeing. Now place Sisyphus beside that image. Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to push a boulder up a mountain for eternity, watching it roll back every time. The icon of futility. And Camus' response is not to free Sisyphus. It is not to break the cycle. It is to imagine Sisyphus at the one moment the gods didn't think of. The walk back down the mountain, that pause, that interval between the boulder reaching the top and Sisyphus beginning again at the bottom. In that moment of descent, Camus says, Sisyphus is conscious. He knows the boulder will roll back. He knows there is no end, and he descends anyway. Not because he has hope, not because he's forgotten, because he is fully aware, and that awareness, held without flinching, is itself a form of freedom. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. 2 images, 2 freedoms. The Buddha's freedom comes from ending the construction. Seeing the builder and the building stops. Sisyphus's freedom comes from continuing the construction with total awareness, knowing it leads nowhere and pushing anyway. The Buddha dismantles the mechanism. Sisyphus embraces it. And both of them, both, would say they are not running from suffering. They would say they are the only ones who have stopped running. Both started in saṃvega. The Buddha found pasāda, serene confidence that the arrow can be removed. Camus stayed in saṃvega and forged it into something the Buddhist tradition never imagined. A saṃvega so complete it becomes its own kind of freedom. But Camus had a name for what the Buddha offered, and it was not a compliment. He called it philosophical suicide. Is he right? ICT 3, the trial philosophical suicide. That is Camus' term for the move he despised most. More than physical suicide, more than nihilism, more than any form of giving up. Because philosophical suicide doesn't look like giving up. It looks like wisdom. It looks like a path. It looks like an answer. And that, Camus would say, is exactly the problem. Here is how he defined it. You are standing in the gap between your need for meaning and the universe's silence. That gap is the absurd. It is uncomfortable. It is permanent. And the temptation, the overwhelming, almost irresistible temptation, is to close it, to find a system, a story, a framework that makes the gap disappear. God, progress, history, reason, transcendence. Any of these will do. The moment you accept one, the tension dissolves. You feel relief. And Camus says, that relief is the death of your honesty. He convicted Kierkegaard, who sacrificed reason for faith. He convicted Jaspers, who appealed to a transcendence beyond evidence. He convicted Husserl, who posited hidden essences beneath the chaos. All of them, Camus argued, arrived at the edge of the absurd, stared into it, and then, at the last moment, jumped, not off the cliff, into a story that made the cliff disappear, now. Buddhism walks into the courtroom. The prosecution case is strong, uncomfortably strong. And if we are going to take Camus seriously, which this video does, we have to let it land. Start with the Four Noble Truths. What are they, structurally? They are a meaning system. Suffering is not random. It has a cause. That cause can be removed. There is a path. This is exactly the kind of framework Camus warned against. A structure that takes the raw confrontation between you and an indifferent universe and organizes it into something navigable, something with direction, something with an endpoint. And what is that endpoint? Nibbana, the cessation of suffering, the unconditioned, a reality beyond the cycle of birth, death, and craving. Whatever else it is, and Buddhists have debated that for 25 centuries, it functions, from Camus' perspective, as an escape, a transcendent elsewhere, the very thing he rejected in Kierkegaard, in Jaspers, in every religious thinker who could not bear to stay in the gap. Then there is the path itself. The Eightfold Path is not a vague aspiration. It is a program. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, 8 steps, a training, a curriculum. This is not someone sitting with the absurd. This is someone building a ladder out of it. By Camus' own criteria, the case practically makes itself. Buddhism encounters the meaninglessness of cyclic existence, saṃvega, and then does precisely what Camus said you must not do. It provides a framework that resolves the tension. It offers a cause for suffering, a path out of suffering, and a destination beyond suffering. The gap between your need and the universe's silence. Buddhism closes that gap, systematically, methodically, beautifully even. But closing it is closing it. If Kierkegaard is guilty for leaping into God, then Buddhism is guilty for leaping into the Dhamma. That is the prosecution, and it is not trivial. The defense. First, and this cuts deeper than it first appears, Camus' entire framework requires a self, a robust, continuous self that confronts the universe, sustains awareness, maintains revolt. Sisyphus is someone. The rebel is someone. The entire architecture of the absurd depends on an eye that stares into the silence and refuses to blink. Buddhism asks, who is this I? The teaching of anatta, not self, does not say you don't exist. That would be annihilationism, which the Buddha rejected as forcefully as Camus rejected nihilism. SN 44.10. What anatta says is subtler and stranger. Every component of what you call self, body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness, is impermanent, conditioned, and not yours to command. S. Hans 22.59. There is no fixed entity performing Kierkegaard's leap of faith. There is no stable I committing philosophical suicide. The very self that Camus wants to keep honest. That self, Buddhism says, is the construction, not the builder, not the foundation, the construction. This is not a leap into meaning. It is a questioning of the one who leaps. Camus never addressed this because he never encountered a tradition that dissolved the subject rather than providing the subject with a better object. Second, and this is where the Buddhist tradition pushes back hardest, the Four Noble Truths are not beliefs. They are tasks. This distinction matters. The first truth is not believe that there is suffering. It is comprehend suffering. Understand it so thoroughly that you stop being driven by it. The second is not believe that craving is the cause. It is abandon craving. The third is not believe in cessation. It is realize cessation. The fourth is not believe in the path. It is develop the path. SN 56.11. This is closer to a medical protocol than a creed. You don't believe in surgery, you undergo it. Camus convicted Kierkegaard for sacrificing reason, for believing against evidence. But the Buddhist framework does not ask you to believe against evidence. It asks you to test, to practice, to see for yourself what happens. Which brings us to the third point, the Kalama Sutta, AN 3.65, one of the most frequently cited passages in the Pali Canon, records the Buddha advising a group of confused villagers not to accept teachings based on tradition, scripture, logic alone, or the authority of a teacher. Test them, apply them, see what leads to harm and what leads to benefit. Accept what survives the test. That is remarkably close to Camus' own empiricism. Do not accept what you cannot verify through experience. Do not take refuge in inherited frameworks. Start with what you can see. The Buddhist and the absurdist agree on method, even if they disagree on where the method leads. Fourth, and this is where the trial becomes genuinely uncertain. The middle way itself undermines the dichotomy Camus assumes. Camus' framework operates on a binary. Either you face the absurd honestly, or you escape into meaning. Two options, revolt or leap. The middle way, S. N 56.11, was the Buddha's earliest teaching after awakening, and its central claim is that the most important dichotomies are usually false. Not indulgence or asceticism, not eternalism or annihilationism, not meaning or meaninglessness, a path that refuses the frame. If Camus' entire prosecution rests on the binary, you either stay in the gap or you leap out of it, and Buddhism rejects that binary as a category error, then the charge may not apply, not because Buddhism is innocent, but because the court is using the wrong law. Fifth, Nibbana. This is the most contested point, and honesty requires saying so. If Nibbana is a transcendent realm, a heavenly destination, a place you go when the cycle ends, then Camus is right. That is a leap. That is an escape. That is philosophical suicide dressed in saffron robes. But the Pali Canon does not describe Nibbana that way. The word itself means unbinding, like a flame going out, not extinguished by force, released from the fuel that sustained it. SN 12.51. Thanisaro Bhikkhu, one of the most careful translators of the Pali Canon, insists that Nibbana is best understood as the ending of suffering. Not a place, not a metaphysical state, but the cessation of the process that creates suffering in the first place. Is that a leap? Or is that simply the fire going out when you stop feeding it? Here is the truth of this trial. It does not resolve. If you read Nibbana metaphysically as a transcendent reality beyond conditioned existence, Camus's charge lands. Buddhism becomes the most sophisticated, most beautiful, most compassionate form of philosophical suicide ever constructed, but philosophical suicide nonetheless. if you read Nibbana pragmatically, as the cessation of a process, tested through practice, verified through experience, then Camus' charge misses because you haven't leaped into anything. You have simply stopped doing the thing that was causing the pain. Both readings are present in the tradition. Both have defenders. Both have textual support. And the 25-century-old debate within Buddhism about the nature of Nibbana is not going to be settled in this video. What can be said is this: the trial reveals something important about both traditions. Camus' framework is powerful, but it assumes a self that Buddhism questions. Buddhism's framework is powerful, but it offers a resolution that Camus would recognize as suspicious. Neither can fully answer the other. And that irresolvability, that honest, unbridgeable tension, is not a failure of the comparison. It is the comparison. The verdict is yours, not because I'm being coy, because this is genuinely one of those questions that answers differently depending on where you stand when you ask it. But the trial is not the end, because even across that disagreement, even with the charge unresolved, these two traditions share more than you might expect, and some of what they share is the most important part. Act 4. What they share. It would be easy at this point to leave the Buddha and Camus on opposite sides of a courtroom and call it a day. Diagnosis, same. Prescription, opposite. End of story. But that would miss something, because the ground they share is not just the starting point. It runs deeper than that, and some of what they share, the world has still not caught up with. Start with hope. Both of them rejected it, and both of them were misunderstood for doing so. When Camus said we must live without appeal, people heard nihilism. Give up. Nothing matters. Stop trying. But that is not what he said. What he said is, stop waiting for an external confirmation that your life matters. Stop looking to the sky, to history, to some future resolution, for permission to live fully now. The appeal is the problem. Not because there is no answer, but because the waiting replaces the living. The Buddha said something structurally similar, and was also misunderstood when he identified tanha as the cause of suffering, SN 56.11. People heard, stop wanting things, become passive, desire nothing. But the Bali Canon makes a distinction that changes everything. Tanha, craving, thirst, the desperate grasping for what isn't here, is not the same as chanda. Chanda is desire too, but it is wholesome intention, aspiration, the energy that moves you toward liberation without clinging to the outcome. The Buddha did not reject all desire. He rejected the kind of desire that feeds on itself, the kind where getting what you want only sharpens the wanting machine, as we might call it. What he preserved was something closer to what Camus would recognize as passion, directed engagement without the demand that reality cooperate. Both rejected hope that is really craving in disguise. Both preserved something that looks like hope, but operates differently. Camus called it revolt. The Buddha called it right effort. Neither is passive, neither is resigned, and neither is waiting for rescue. Now, radical honesty. This is where the convergence is almost eerie. Buddhisati, usually translated as mindfulness, though that word has been stretched so far in the modern West, it barely holds its shape anymore, is, at its core, the practice of bare attention, seeing what is actually happening, not what you want to be happening, not what you're afraid is happening. What is arising right now, in this body, in this mind, without adding a story to it. MN10. Camus Camus' absurd awareness is structurally identical in its demand. Maintain lucid consciousness. Do not flinch. Do not soften the picture. Do not reach for a narrative that makes the uncomfortable comfortable. See clearly and keep seeing clearly, even when what you see offers you nothing in return. Both traditions insist that most human suffering comes not from reality itself, but from the lies we layer on top of it. The Buddhist term is avidya, ignorance, not seeing. Camus would have called it bad faith, though he was careful to distinguish himself from Sartre's use of that term. The mechanics differ. The demand is the same. Stop lying to yourself. Whatever comes after, liberation or revolt, or simply a clearer afternoon, begins with that. But here is where they part, and the parting is instructive. For the Buddha, clear seeing is transformative. The problem is ignorance. Dissolve ignorance, and suffering dissolves with it. Seeing clearly is not just the beginning of the path, it is the mechanism of freedom. Vipassana, insight meditation, is built on exactly this premise. Sustained, precise attention to the nature of experience reveals that experience is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self, san. 22.59. And that revelation, not as an idea, but as a lived recognition, loosens the grip. The construction slows. The house builder is seen. For Camus, clear seeing is not transformative. It is constitutive. You see clearly, and what you see is the absurd. And the absurd does not dissolve under scrutiny. It intensifies. The clearer you see, the more vivid the gap between your need and the world's silence. Looking is not the cure. Looking is the condition. You will look for the rest of your life, and the absurd will look back, and neither of you will blink. Same starting discipline, opposite destinations. For the Buddha, attention is a scalpel. For Camus, attention is a mirror bolted to the wall. And then, community. This is the part that surprises people, because Camus is usually read as a solitary figure, the lone rebel, the man on the beach in The Stranger. But Camus was not a solitary thinker. He was a man of intense friendships, of theatre companies, of football teams, of the French Resistance, and his philosophy, at its deepest, moves from I to we. The key line is from the rebel. I rebel, therefore we exist. Not I rebel, therefore I exist. Qua. We. Rebellion is not a private act. The moment you refuse to accept an injustice, not just for yourself but on principle, you have implied that something matters beyond your own experience. You have implied that other people's suffering counts, and in that implication, solidarity is born. Not solidarity based on shared belief or shared doctrine. Solidarity based on shared refusal. We are all in this together, and this is a universe that offers no meaning, and our togetherness is not a solution, but a defiance. The Buddhist parallel is the Sangha, the community of practitioners. But the architecture is different. The Sangha looks forward together. It is oriented toward a shared destination, liberation, the end of suffering, the cessation of the cycle. Members support each other on a path that has a direction. There is somewhere to go, and going together is better than going alone. Camusian solidarity looks sideways, not forward. There is no destination. There is only the shared act of pushing, of refusing, of staying conscious. Companions in the struggle, not travelers on a road. No map, no arrival. Just the knowledge that the person next to you is also pushing a boulder, and that you're pushing, both of you pushing, is not meaningless, even if it is endless. Both move from isolation to connection. Both insist that the deepest individual insight creates a bond with others, but the bond has a different structure. In one, we walk together towards something. In the other, we stand together inside something. And then, the problem neither of them can solve for the other. Camus needs a self. His entire framework, revolt, freedom, passion, requires someone who owns the experience. Sisyphus is not a process. Sisyphus is a person. The rebel is not a pattern of conditions arising and passing. The rebel is a human being who says no. The absurd itself requires a subject who confronts an object. Without a robust, continuing self, the whole architecture collapses. Who revolts? Who sustains awareness? Who descends the mountain? Buddhism asks those questions and means them. Anatta, not self, does not annihilate the person. The Buddha ate meals, had conversations, walked dusty roads for 45 years after his awakening. But anatta does dissolve the fixity of the self. What you call I is a process, a dependently arising, constantly shifting confluence of body, feeling, perception, mental formations and consciousness. SN 22.59. No fixed core, no unchanging witness, no stable I who stands against the universe in perpetual revolt. Camus would have found this insufficient. Not wrong, necessarily, but insufficient, because revolt requires ownership. It requires someone who refuses and keeps refusing, and knows they are the one refusing. A self that is merely a process cannot rebel. It can only continue. The Buddhist might respond, that is precisely the liberation, the need to rebel, the need to stand against something, to own the struggle, to be the one who says no, is itself a form of craving. A subtle form, perhaps the subtlest, but craving nonetheless. The self that Camus insists on is, from the Buddhist perspective, the last wall of the house, and the house builder is still building. This disagreement is not resolvable, and pretending otherwise would disrespect both traditions. It is possible, genuinely possible, that this is a place where two profound, rigorously honest maps of human experience simply point in different directions. Not because one is wrong, because they are mapping different things. Camus maps what it is to live fully inside conditioned existence. The Buddha maps what it is to see through it. One more thing they share, and it matters. Neither of them is nihilism. Camus has been called a nihilist so many times that the label has almost stuck. It hasn't. He fought it in every book, every essay, every interview. The absurd does not mean nothing matters. It means nothing matters externally. And therefore, what you choose to care about matters absolutely. Your choices, in the absence of cosmic meaning, are the only meaning there is. The Buddha has been called a nihilist, an annihilationist in the Pali terminology. With equal frequency and equal inaccuracy, he explicitly rejected the view that the self is destroyed at death, just as he rejected the view that the self continues eternally. SN 44.10. The middle way runs between those positions, not through either of them. Both have been misread in the same direction. Both were more careful than their critics, and both would have recognized in each other the same insistence. Do not mistake honesty for despair. Act 5. 2 maps, 1 mountain. So here we are, the same mountain, 2 paths that do not meet. Camus offers freedom within. The prison is real, the walls do not move. The boulder rolls back every time. And freedom is not the absence of the prison. Freedom is what happens when you stop pretending you are anywhere else. You are here, the walls are here, and your consciousness, held steady and unflinching inside those walls, is the one thing the universe cannot take from you, not because it is eternal, because it is yours, right now, in this breath, for whatever time you have. There is no outside for Camus, no unconditioned, no escape hatch, no transcendent elsewhere, no reality beyond this one. And he does not mourn that absence. He refuses to. The mourning itself would be a form of appeal, a wish directed at a universe that does not receive wishes. Instead, revolt. Instead, this sunlight, this coffee, this conversation, this page, this afternoon in Algiers with the Mediterranean pouring light across everything. Not because it means something, because it is happening. The Buddha offers freedom from. The prison is real, but it is constructed. What you take to be walls are processes. What you take to be the boulder is craving. What you take to be the mountain is the cycle itself. Birth, aging, sickness, death, and birth again. And there is an outside. The Pali Canon names it directly. The unconditioned, asankata, SN 43. Nibbana, not a place, not a heaven, not a reward. The unbinding, the moment the fire goes out, not because someone extinguished it, but because it stopped being fed. There is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. If there were not that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, there would be no escape discerned from what is born, become, made, conditioned. UD 8.1. That is a claim Camus would not have made, could not have made. It is, from his perspective, exactly the kind of assertion that closes the gap, that takes the raw confrontation between you and the silence and replaces it with a destination, a light at the end of the tunnel. And Camus spent his life insisting that the tunnel is all there is, and the light is something your eyes invented because they couldn't bear the dark. And the Buddhist would respond, the tunnel is all there is, until you see who built it. There is a scholar named Radhulu Weininger who published an essay reimagining Sisyphus as a bodhisattva. In her reading, Sisyphus does not push the boulder for himself. He pushes it for all beings. The struggle is not defiance. It is compassion. The mountain is samsara. The pushing is the bodhisattva's vow to remain inside the cycle until every sentient being is free. It is a provocative image, and it is tempting because it resolves the tension beautifully. Camus' courage fused with the Buddha's compassion, the pushing reframed as purpose, the mountain reframed as service. But I am not going to offer you that resolution. Not because it isn't interesting. It is. But because the moment we resolve the tension, we have done exactly what both Camus and the Buddha warned against in their own ways. We have made the uncomfortable comfortable. We have smoothed the edges, and the edges are where the insight lives. Here is what I want to leave you with instead. You have, almost certainly, experienced saṃvega. That moment, maybe at 3 a.m, maybe after a loss, maybe in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, when the machinery of daily life suddenly goes transparent, and you see through it, and what you see is, this doesn't lead anywhere. The accumulating, the planning, the hoping, the distracting, none of it resolves the fundamental situation. You are here briefly, and then you won't be, and the universe will not pause to notice. That moment is real. Both Camus and the Buddha would tell you, do not run from it. Do not numb it with entertainment. Do not paper it over with optimism. It is one of the most honest moments a human being can have. What you do next is where the traditions diverge. And this video is not going to tell you which tradition is right, because that is not something a video can do. It is something a life does, over decades, through practice or through revolt, or through some combination that neither Camus nor the Buddha would have predicted. But here is what both of them would agree on, and it is not nothing. Do not look away. Whatever you do with the suffering, Whether you treat it as a diagnosis with a cure or as a condition with no exit, do not look away. The looking is where both of them began, and it is the one thing that neither tradition will ever ask you to stop doing. Camus, near the end of his life, wrote a sentence that has been quoted so often it has nearly lost its meaning. But place it here, after everything we've discussed, and listen to it again. In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer. He was not talking about hope. He was not talking about transcendence. He was talking about what remains when everything false has been stripped away. An aliveness that survives the winter precisely because it does not depend on the winter ending. The Buddha, at the moment of his awakening, said, "House builder, you are seen." DHP 153 to 154. Not house builder, you are defeated. Not house builder, you are punished. Seen. The most radical act in the Buddhist canon is not a battle. It is an act of attention. The builder is seen, and the building stops. One found an invincible summer inside the winter. The other saw who built the winter in the first place. Same mountain, two maps, and the only thing worse than choosing the wrong one would be pretending you don't have to walk.